All right, guys. So we are now officially 4 days out from the election. And I don't think that any honest person could tell you with confidence that they know how this election is going to play out. It's basically neck and neck within the margin of error in every single major swing state. We're going to get to a bunch of polling data here in a second. But I wanted to start off with two different segments that were done here by CNN's Harry Enten. In the first one, he makes the case if Trump wins, the signs were there all along, and explains if he wins, here's why that may have happened. And then in the second one, he does basically the same exact thing for Kamala Harris. Now, he's covering his bases here. So no matter who wins the election, he's going to be right, which is honestly something I respect a lot more than somebody who says that, it's going to be a Trump 50-state landslide or Kamala has this in the bag. Nobody knows what's going to happen. But here we go. If Trump wins, these will likely be some of the major indicators that we will look back on and say, okay, that kind of makes sense, right? So let's go ahead and jump into this one.
28% of Americans, voters, think the country is going in the right direction, is on the right track. And I want you to put that into a historical perspective for you. Okay, what's the average percentage of the public that thinks that the country is on the right track when the incumbent party loses? It's 25%. That 25% looks an awful bit like that 28% up there. It doesn't look anything like this 42% doesn't look anything like this 28%. So the bottom line is very few Americans think the country is on the right track at this particular point. It tracks much more with when the incumbent party loses than with it wins. In fact, I went back through history. There isn't a single time in which 28% of the American public thinks the country is going on the right track in which the incumbent party actually won. They always lose when just 28% of the country believes that the country is on the right track.
It is you are swimming up.
Okay. Wow. So again, basically, this is his case for Trump, why Trump may win the election. There has never been a time where the incumbent party has won the presidential election when this low of an amount of people believe the country is heading on the right track. This ties into two of my three main critiques of how Kamala Harris has been running her campaign since Biden dropped out. And that's number one, that she hasn't distanced herself enough from Joe Biden, right? If people think the country is not heading on the right track, then you would want to create distance between yourself and the current president, right? Instead, she sort of, remained cozied up to Biden. And when she's asked, what would you have done differently than Biden? She says, I wouldn't have done absolutely anything differently than Biden. That's a big mistake. If people are not happy with the status quo, if people are struggling to get by, you need to make yourself the change candidate, right? And again, it's a very weird situation because Trump was already president. So he's not really the change candidate, but he is in a way because he's not currently in power, and Kamala Harris is currently the vice president, but she also hasn't been the president because she's only been the VP. So it's a really weird election scenario right now when so many people want a change candidate, and we're kind of stuck with two people who are but aren't change candidates at the same exact time. The other thing that I'll say about this, which ties into my other critique of Kamala Harris, is that, again, if people want a change candidate, you have to be running on a bold left-wing economic populist agenda. Now, they've done, some economic policy proposals here and there, like the first-time home buyers tax credit and the child tax credit and, expanding Medicare to cover at-home care. They've done some small things here and there, but I don't think they're leaning nearly enough into popular left-wing economic policy. They're leaning very heavily into abortion, which could work, and they're leaning very heavily into Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. But is that going to be enough for her to represent herself as a, massive break from the current status quo? I don't know, but again, some pretty massive alarm bells going off here.
Upstream, if you're trying to win in this environment. Also, President Biden, on the micro level, a lot of the coverage today is over something President Biden said. On the macro level, what kind of a weight is he on the Harris campaign?
Yeah, so, Joe Biden isn't on the ballot, but he's certainly in the minds of Americans, right? So I went back and I looked, okay, was the successor of the same party when the president's net approval rating was negative at this point, which Joe Biden's most definitely is? He's 15 points underwater. Now, we don't know if Kamala Harris is going to succeed Joe Biden, but we know back in 2008, George W. Bush, his approval rating was down in the 20s. Did a Republican succeed George W. Bush? No. How about in 1968? Lyndon Baines Johnson, his net approval rating was negative. Did a Democrat succeed Lyndon Baines Johnson? No. How about in 52? Harry S. Truman, his approval rating was in the 20s, if not the upper teens. Did a Democrat succeed Harry S. Truman in 52? My memory, no. No, as Kate Baldwin says.
Diana.
No. Diana.
Sorry.
Well
Close. Wrong time of the year.
Well played.
Dwight Eisenhower, a Republican, succeeded Harry S. Truman. So the bottom line is, for Kamala Harris to win, she'd have to break history, be a Democrat to succeed Joe Biden when Biden's approval rating is way underwater at this point.
Again, it could happen. It just doesn't in recent history for sure. Okay, registration numbers, Harry.
Yeah, Republicans have been registering voters in big, huge numbers. They have been gaining in party registration versus the Democrats in the swing states with party registration. We're talking Arizona. I think it's a 5-point. They've expanded their lead from 5 points from where it was back in 2020. How about Nevada? Big Republican registrations there. They like the early vote. How about North Carolina? Big Republican registration gains. How about Pennsylvania? We spoke about it before a few months ago. Big Republican party registration gains versus from where they were 4 years ago. So Republicans are putting more Republicans in the electorate. The Democratic number versus the Republican number has shrunk. And so the bottom line is, if Republicans win, come next week, Donald Trump comes next week, the signs all along will have been obvious. We would look at the right direction being very low, Joe Biden's approval rating being very low, and Republicans really registering numbers. You can't say you weren't warned.
Again, this is the data which supports the idea of a Trump victory. Tomorrow, viewers, you will get the other side.
Okay, so again, that's the case for if Trump wins, the signs were there all along and it will be incredibly obvious. Now let's look at the case for if Kamala Harris wins, the signs were there all along and it will be incredibly obvious. So let's go ahead and jump in to this second clip here.
Is that Harris, simply put, is more popular than Donald Trump. Her net favorable rating is higher than Trump. She's at -2. Trump's at -7. I went all the way back since 1956 and looked at the polls. Does the more popular candidate usually win? The answer is absolutely yes. 16 times the more popular candidate has won. Only one time the less popular candidate has won. I will note that was Donald Trump back in 2016. But of course, remember, Hillary Clinton was quite unpopular herself. But the bottom line is this. Kamala Harris has been consistently more popular in the polls than Donald Trump is. She's consistently had a higher net favorable rating than Donald Trump. And normally, usually, the candidate who's more popular goes on to win on election day.
Yep.
So basically, again, you have like completely contradictory historical precedents here. On the one hand, you have there has never been a situation where, since 1956 at least, where the less popular candidate has won, minus 2016 with Hillary Clinton, who was also deeply unpopular. So that is a historical indicator in favor of Kamala Harris. And then in the previous video we just watched, the historical indicator is that when only 28% of the country thinks that we're heading on the right track, the incumbent party doesn't win. So either way, regardless who wins, Trump or Kamala, there's going to be history made in the sense that it's completely unprecedented.
Democrats are fond of that saying, forget the polls, when we vote, we win.
Yes.
And you see something in that.
Absolutely. Let's take a look at the special elections, right? Democrats in special elections, their performances the last 2 years. What has happened? We're looking at state legislative and federal special elections. On average, these Democrats have surpassed Joe Biden's 2020 margin by 2 points. And remember, Joe Biden won. So the fact that these Democrats have been doing better than Joe Biden's been doing is a good sign. Historically speaking, there is correlation between how folks do in the special elections, especially in this polarized era, and how folks do eventually in the presidential election. It was actually one of the warning signs last time around in 2020, where Democrats really weren't doing that great in special elections, despite the polls saying that Joe Biden was going to win rather easily. It suggested Trump would do better on election day. This time around, the special elections are suggesting the opposite, that in fact Joe Biden, because Democrats have been exceeding Joe Biden's margin, that maybe Democrats will actually do better than the polls have been indicating.
But what about the fact, two factors. Yeah. One, the right track, wrong track. Country, so few people think the country is going on the right track right now.
Yeah.
And also something you pointed out yesterday as a factor, which is Biden's bad approval rating.
Yeah. So yesterday I pointed out that very few people think the country is going on the right track. Very few people approve of Joe Biden's approval rating. You can see it right here. In 2024, it's just 28% who say the country's on the right track, 40% approve of Joe Biden's job. But remember, in 2022, these metrics look awfully similar. In fact, slightly less believe the country was on the right track, slightly more approved of Joe Biden's job, but very similar numbers here. And remember, even though the top metrics were bad for Democrats in 2022, the White House party did historically well in that midterm. So the bottom line is, Kate, a lot of Democrats believe when voters vote, they win. And with abortion being a much bigger issue this time around than historically speaking when it was in 2022, Democrats did historically well. Perhaps Democrats will surprise a lot of folks and do historically well come next Tuesday.
And that's something that I've been hearing a lot from some of the main poll guys, poll watchers that I follow at least. Like Edinger Mentum is also making the case right now. He's a great follow, by the way, for election coverage. And he's also making the case that there's a potential right now that the polls are, pretty significantly underestimating Democrats in this election. And as Harry was pointing out here, a huge reason for that, probably the main reason for that, is the post-Roe v. Wade reality in American politics that has just completely screwed Republicans over and over and over again, where even when a majority of the country says, we don't really like Biden and we don't really think the country is heading on the right track, we still want to have control over our own bodies, at least for women, right? And women are going to play a massive role in this election. There's a huge gender divide that's going on right now, a historic gender divide where women are splitting significantly for Kamala, men are splitting significantly for Trump. And I think specifically like white suburban women are going to be probably the main key factor in this election. It's something that Trump has historically over the last two election cycles done very well with like white suburban women. Kamala's trying to win them over to her side. Can abortion make the difference on that, or will issues like immigration or, the cost of groceries or whatever the case may be, will those outweigh the issue of abortion? I mean, again, so many different contradictory variables that are at play right now. Now, in terms of where they're going to make their final pitches, we have the Trump rally schedule over the next couple of days here from Alan Smith. So he's going tomorrow on November 2nd. He's going to be going to North Carolina. He's going to be going to Salem, Virginia for some reason. He's going to be going to North Carolina again. And he's going to be going on the next day to Pennsylvania. Then he's going to go back to North Carolina. Then he's going to Macon, Georgia. Okay, and then he's going to be going to, again, North Carolina once again, then Pennsylvania, then a different place, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, after going to Philly, and he's finishing off in Michigan, in Grand Rapids. So his final speech, his final pitch is going to be in Michigan. For Kamala, so on Thursday, which was yesterday, she was in Phoenix. She went to Reno and Las Vegas, Nevada. And then today, she's waking up in Vegas. She's going to Outagamie County and Milwaukee, which are both in Wisconsin. Then she's going to my home city of Atlanta, Georgia, followed by Charlotte, North Carolina on Saturday. And on Sunday, she's going to Michigan, mostly in Metro Detroit. And then on Monday, the final day before the election, she's going to Pennsylvania. So interesting that Trump is finishing off in Michigan. Kamala is finishing off in Pennsylvania. We also have here, moving on, the Nate Silver model projections that I wanted to go through, and I created a map based on his projections here, but just to show you how close everything really is. And it's cool how he puts like a trajectory of different high profile events and how that may have potentially impacted some of these averages here in the nationals. You have Biden dropping out here, and then you see Harris joining in, and she starts to do better relative to Trump than Joe Biden was doing. You have Kamala choosing Tim Walz here. She gets a little bit of an increase in the gap there, it looks like, slightly. Kennedy, RFK Jr. dropping out, joining the Trump campaign. That happens here. Then you have the Harris-Trump debate, which honestly, even though I think most people said that Kamala won that debate, it doesn't look like it really made much of a difference nationally, at least. And then you have the Walz-Vance debate as well. But in the nationals, you have Kamala leading 48.5% to Trump's 47.4%. And also keep in mind, there's been a lot of talk during this election cycle about how pollsters really don't want to embarrass themselves and underestimate Trump. And so they could potentially be underestimating Democrats just in their attempt to artificially change the way that they are doing polls to try to count for the Trump vote more aggressively. So there could be a factor there where Kamala Harris is being underestimated. But again, I still think all of these are going to be extremely close. Here we have Arizona. So his model has Trump winning Arizona 49% to Harris's 46.8%. So like a 2.2 point gap there, roughly. That's probably the biggest gap that we're going to see in these swing states outside of Florida, which I don't think anybody believes Democrats were, ever going to win in this election cycle. Then you have Georgia, my home state here, with Trump winning by about 2 percentage points. If Kamala wins Georgia, I see a lot of people saying she has a really good chance of winning in Georgia. That will shock me, okay? As somebody who grew up and lived 90% of my life in Georgia, it will blow my mind if they go for Kamala Harris over Trump, given, the current state of this election and what I've grown up believing that most people in Georgia, in the suburban areas and in the more rural areas are focused on. I would be shocked if Kamala carries Georgia, but his model has Trump up by 2 points there. We have Michigan with Kamala Harris up 48.4% to Trump's 47.2%. We have Minnesota, which is pretty solid for Kamala Harris. Again, one of those swing states that's not really a swing state right now. Then we have Nevada, which is probably the closest of any of these, with Trump at 48.2% and Kamala at 47.9%. Then you have New Hampshire with Harris, decent lead there. North Carolina, Trump is up 48.7 to Kamala Harris's 47.4. So like a 1 point difference there. Again, all of these are within the margin of error. You have Trump here in Pennsylvania, which is probably going to be the key swing state. He's winning 48.4% to Kamala's 47.8%. Then you have Texas here, Trump with a very solid lead. Virginia, Kamala with a solid lead. And then finally, Wisconsin, Harris with a very slim, less than 1 percentage point lead over Trump. So this is what that map looks like based on Nate Silver's model. Now, again, This has Trump winning here, 287 to Kamala's 251. But because these are all within the margin of error, you could have just incredibly weird situations playing out. So you could have, like, for example, I don't know, let's say Kamala somehow flips North Carolina. That still wouldn't be enough there. But let's say she flips North Carolina and Nevada. Okay, well, then that would be enough. But let's say Trump wins Nevada, he wins North Carolina, but then Kamala holds the blue wall. Okay, so that's a Kamala win. All of these, again, are extremely close. This would be 270 to 268. And by the way, there is a scenario, I'm forgetting on exactly what it is in my head right now. Unlikely, but it is possible that we get an exact 269 to 269 final result in this election, which would be absolutely wild. But, you know, if you ask me, just based on vibes, and I don't know if this is like my final prediction here, maybe I'll make one of those videos on Sunday or Monday, but based on the vibes, based on the polling data being a complete shit show, up in the air, 50-50 coin flip, I think that this map that I'm showing right here is probably the most likely outcome. I think I could definitely see Kamala holding the blue wall of Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Trump hangs on to, you know, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, and North Carolina. So this would be Trump flipping some of the Joe Biden states from 2020. Remember, Biden won Georgia, you know, Biden won Arizona, I believe. He also won Nevada. So Trump could flip a number of these states from 2020. And if Kamala can just hold on to these 3 states here, then it wouldn't matter. Kamala would still squeak by with a win. And it seems like this is kind of where they've been focusing a majority of their campaign on. Obviously, that's why Kamala is finishing. Her last rally is going to be in Pennsylvania, which, again, could absolutely decide the election. Now, final thing here, because, you know, obviously important to point out that regardless of who wins this election, even though I think there are some very notable differences between both candidates, the winners will always be Wall Street. The winners will always be the billionaire class that in this election cycle is setting new records for the amount that they are dumping in to our electoral system here. From Philip Heimberger, he says billionaires spend nearly $2 billion. $2 billion on the 2024 U.S. presidential election, which is 60% more than in 2020. They say almost 3/4 of the billionaire campaign spending is going to Republicans. And of course, he points out here, such massive billionaire campaign spending is not a sign of a healthy democracy. In fact, I would think it's, you know, a very large stretch of an argument to say that we are a functioning democracy with the amount of billionaire, millionaire, and corporate money that is flooding into the campaign coffers of our elected officials. So this is what they have. 72% of this billionaire money going to Republicans, 22% to Democrats. You have a little 3% there for pro-crypto candidates, 2% to RFK Jr. Still, I mean, I don't know. Maybe that was before he dropped out. But yeah, so they are the true winners of this. The war hawks, the military-industrial complex, Wall Street, the billionaire class, corporate America. Those are going to be the real winners of this election. Now, again, I'll just reiterate my final take here on, you know, if Kamala wins, this is why. If Trump wins, this is why. I think this has been a race to the bottom. I don't think that either of them have been running particularly good campaigns, to say the least. I mean, you look at Trump's final pitches, you know, he's at Madison Square Garden reiterating his plan to deport tens of millions of people from the country and to send the military after his political opponents. And you have guys up on stage who are making jokes about incredibly important, American communities like the Puerto Rican community, which, by the way, has a huge role in the Pennsylvania election, by the way, in some of the key swing areas of Pennsylvania. There's a massive Puerto Rican population there. And so, you know, he has surrogates like Tony Hinchcliffe going and making jokes about how Puerto Rico is a floating island of garbage. Trump's just like general extremism in the final stages of this campaign have been off the charts. And I don't think that he has nearly the same sort of populist edge to him that he did in the one election that he actually came out as the winner in 2016 against Hillary Clinton. I think he's moved very, very far away from his populist rhetoric. And now it's much more focused on himself and how he's being targeted and the deep state is coming after him. You know, the DOJ is coming after him. And, I don't think that he can get away from his extremist tendencies that are like very off-putting to normie Americans. And then on top of that, you have the fact that, again, he appointed the Supreme Court justices that overturned Roe v. Wade. That's going to be an absolutely massive factor in this election. Now, with the Kamala campaign, I kid you not, guys, just a couple of days ago, they were sending like Bill Clinton out to Michigan to scold Arab American voters. First off, like the NAFTA, Bill Clinton, that's the guy that we're going to send to the Rust Belt, the place where our jobs were exported overseas. Okay, bizarre decision to make there. But then when he gets up on stage, he starts scolding Arab American voters and saying, I feel for you that, your families have potentially been killed by U.S. bombs that we're sending over to Israel in their genocide in Gaza and their war in Lebanon. Whoops, sorry about that. But don't you know about Hamas using human shields? Like, that's the kind of shit that he was saying up on stage. They've also sent out, like, AIPAC-funded Richie Torres to go to Michigan to lecture Arab American voters. I mean, if Kamala loses, the three main reasons. Number one, she hasn't broken from Biden. People want to change candidate. They're not happy with the status quo. You won't break from Biden. That's number one. Number two, again, she won't break on the genocide in Gaza or the escalation towards a potential war in Iran. And that's something that the Trump campaign has capitalized on, saying if Kamala wins, we're heading for a massive war in the region. Trump is going to bring back peace and whatever. That's sort of the narrative that he has been attacking Kamala with in some of the ads that I've seen, at least. So those are reason number one, reason number two. And then again, reason number three is people want change. People are not happy with the status quo. They're not happy with the direction of the country. And you're not really offering much, right? I mean, you're offering that you are not Donald Trump, right? So you won't carry the baggage that he does. But in terms of like addressing the structural issues that average working class Americans are facing right now, you're really not doing much. I mean, again, we have some policies here and there, the, child tax credit, and that's great. And, a housing subsidy for first-time home buyers. And, she mentioned sometimes that she wants to go after corporate price gouging, but I just don't think it's been nearly an aggressive enough campaign. It's not even as left-wing of a campaign platform as like Joe Biden's was from 2020, which should not be possible, but somehow it is. So I can see, again, as Harry was pointing out in this clip, in both the clips we watched, I can see the case being made for either a Trump win or a Kamala win. I have no idea what's going to happen. My gut says Trump is going to win, but then when I sit down and I do the maps and I look at the polling, I think Kamala is going to win. So I'm very conflicted on this. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Curious to hear what you guys think is going to be the outcome of this election, and who are you guys going to vote for? If you live in a safe state, I think it's a much easier calculation to make to not vote for Kamala Harris if you're pissed off about her support for a genocide in Gaza. If you live in a swing state, there are a whole other bunch of issues that people take into consideration, right? Maybe abortion is important to you. Maybe there are a whole host of other issues that Trump brings to the table that you could view as a very legitimate threat. And so maybe in a swing state, you vote against Trump just to keep him out of office, right? So I think there's a lot of different factors at play here. Let me know what you guys are doing. Let me know what you guys think. What the fuck's going to happen? Because I don't know.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying